A widow refused to sell her small farm. The next day, bulldozers surrounded her house at dawn. Elena Marquez stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in her weathered hands, watching 5 massive yellow machines form a perfect circle around her century-old farmhouse. Their diesel engines idled in unnatural synchronization, filling the morning air with mechanical breathing. No operators sat in the cabs. No construction signs marked the perimeter. No permits were posted anywhere she could see. The machines simply waited, their steel blades gleaming in the first light, as if they had materialized from the earth itself during the night. Elena had lived on this patch of Texas soil for 32 years, ever since marrying David and inheriting his family's land. The 200 acres stretched from the main road to Willow Creek, supporting a modest cattle operation and the vegetable garden that kept them self-sufficient. David had died 8 months ago, leaving her alone with the mortgage payments, the aging equipment, and the constant phone calls from Meridian Development Corporation offering to buy her out. She had refused every offer, each one more generous than the last, because selling meant abandoning everything David had worked to preserve. The phone had rung yesterday evening while she fed the chickens. Harrison Vale, Meridian's coordinator, spoke in the same smooth tone he always used, but something underneath had changed. When she told him her answer remained no, he paused longer than usual before saying the company understood her position and respected her decision. The call ended too politely, too cleanly, like a door closing with deliberate finality. Now these machines surrounded her home like mechanical vultures, their presence both threatening and impossible to explain. Elena pulled on her boots and stepped onto the front porch, scanning the equipment for any sign of human activity. The morning wind carried the scent of motor oil and heated metal, foreign smells that had no business in her yard where wildflowers and sage had bloomed undisturbed for generations. Her cell phone buzzed against her hip. A text message from an unknown number contained only an address and a time. County Courthouse, 2:00 p.m. today. No signature, no explanation, just coordinates and a deadline that felt more like an ultimatum. Elena looked back at the bulldozers, their yellow paint bright against her weathered barn, and realized someone had planned this moment with surgical precision. The machines continued their patient vigil, waiting for something she could not understand, while questions multiplied in her mind faster than she could process them. Who had sent these bulldozers? Why position them in a perfect circle? What was supposed to happen at the courthouse this afternoon? And most disturbing of all, how had someone obtained permission to bring heavy machinery onto her private property without her knowledge or consent? Elena walked the perimeter of her property, staying well clear of the bulldozers while documenting everything with her phone. Each machine bore the same rental company logo, Peterson Heavy Equipment out of Austin, but no work orders or contact information were visible anywhere. She photographed license plates, serial numbers, and the precise positioning that seemed too deliberate to be random. Her nearest neighbor, Frank Hutchins, appeared at the fence line separating their properties, his face grim with concern. Frank had ranched the adjacent land for 40 years and treated Elena like the daughter he never had since David's passing. He gestured toward the machines with obvious confusion. "Elena, what in the hell is going on over there? Marta called me at 5 this morning saying she heard engines running in your yard." Elena climbed through the fence rails to meet him, grateful for a familiar face in this surreal morning. Frank's presence reminded her that the world still operated according to normal rules, even when her small corner of it seemed to have tilted sideways. "I have no idea. They were here when I woke up. No paperwork, no crew, nothing that makes sense." She showed him the mysterious text message, watching his weathered face darken as he read. Frank studied the courthouse address with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. "That's not the main courthouse, Elena. That's the annex building where they handle property transfers and estate matters. Why would someone want you there this afternoon?" The question hung between them like a challenge, demanding answers neither of them possessed. Elena felt the weight of David's absence more sharply than usual, missing his steady presence and practical wisdom that had guided them through every previous crisis. A black sedan pulled into her driveway, moving slowly past the bulldozers as if their presence was perfectly ordinary. 2 men in dark suits emerged, carrying briefcases, and wearing the kind of confident expressions that suggested they held all the cards in whatever game was being played. The older man approached with his hand extended, his smile too practiced to be genuine. "Mrs. Marquez, I'm Harrison Vale from Meridian Development. I believe we spoke yesterday evening." Elena recognized his voice immediately, but felt surprised by his physical presence. She had imagined him differently, perhaps larger and more intimidating, but Vale stood barely taller than herself with thinning hair and soft hands that had never worked cattle or mended fence. "Mr. Vale, can you explain why these machines are on my property without permission?" His companion, a younger man with nervous eyes, pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed it to Vale with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. Vale opened the folder carefully, his expression shifting to something resembling sympathy. "Mrs. Marquez, I'm afraid there's been some confusion regarding your property status. These documents indicate that your late husband had entered into certain agreements that may affect your current ownership position." Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not from machinery, but from the terrible certainty that everything she thought she knew about her life was about to change. Elena took the folder with hands that refused to remain steady. The documents inside looked official, complete with county seals and notarized signatures, but something felt wrong the moment she began reading. The first page showed a mineral rights agreement allegedly signed by David 3 months before his death, granting Meridian Development exclusive extraction rights to her entire property for a period of 99 years. Her husband's signature appeared at the bottom of each page, but Elena had handled his paperwork for decades and knew his handwriting better than her own. The signatures were close, convincingly close, but David always made a distinctive loop in the letter D that these documents lacked entirely. More disturbing was the date, because 3 months before his death, David had been in the hospital recovering from surgery and barely able to hold a pen, much less conduct complex business negotiations. Frank stepped closer, reading over her shoulder with the careful attention of someone who understood that details mattered in situations like this. His sharp intake of breath told her he had spotted the same inconsistencies that were making her stomach twist into knots. "Mrs. Marquez," Vale continued in his practiced tone, "these agreements were properly filed with the county recorder's office and establish clear legal precedent for development activities on this property. The bulldozers you see represent the beginning of preliminary site preparation for mineral extraction operations." Elena looked up from the documents to study Vale's face, searching for any sign of deception or uncertainty. His younger companion fidgeted with his briefcase handle, avoiding eye contact in a way that suggested discomfort with the proceedings. "My husband never mentioned mineral rights to me, Mr. Vale. We discussed everything related to this property, and he would never have made agreements without my knowledge." Vale's expression shifted slightly, revealing the first crack in his professional facade. "Mrs. Marquez, I understand this comes as a surprise, but legal documents speak for themselves. Your presence at the courthouse this afternoon will allow us to formalize the transition and discuss compensation for the surface rights to your home." The casual mention of compensation for her own house hit Elena like a physical blow. These people were not asking to buy her property anymore. They were informing her that they already owned the mineral rights beneath it and planned to exercise those rights regardless of her wishes. Frank placed a protective hand on Elena's shoulder, his presence radiating the kind of quiet anger that came from witnessing obvious injustice. "Elena, you need to call Caleb Morrison right now. Something about this whole situation stinks worse than a dead skunk in August." Vale's confident smile faltered at the mention of a lawyer's name, confirming Elena's growing suspicion that these documents would not survive proper legal scrutiny. The question was whether she could prove their fraudulent nature before the courthouse meeting this afternoon, and what would happen if she failed to appear as instructed. Elena dialed Caleb Morrison's number while Vale and his companion waited by their sedan, their body language suggesting they were not accustomed to having their authority questioned. Caleb answered on the second ring, his familiar voice providing immediate reassurance in this increasingly chaotic morning. "Elena, what's wrong? You sound upset." She explained the situation rapidly, from the bulldozers to the documents to the courthouse appointment, while Caleb listened without interruption. When she finished, silence stretched across the phone line for several seconds before he responded. "Elena, I handled all of David's legal affairs in his final months. He never signed any mineral rights agreements, and I can prove it. Can you photograph those documents and text them to me right now?" Elena moved away from Vale and his companion, angling her phone to capture clear images of each page. The camera flash reflected off the official seals and notary stamps, creating small bright spots that looked almost like warning signals against the fraudulent paperwork. Caleb's phone buzzed as each image arrived, and Elena could hear him shuffling papers in his office as he compared the signatures to authentic documents in David's file. When he spoke again, his voice carried the sharp edge of controlled anger. "Elena, those signatures are forgeries. Good forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. David's real signature has characteristics that are completely missing from these documents. More importantly, the notary stamp belongs to Sarah Chen, who moved to California 6 months ago and surrendered her Texas commission before leaving." The revelation hit Elena like cold water, confirming what her instincts had already suspected while providing concrete evidence of criminal fraud. Someone had invested significant time and effort into creating these fake documents, suggesting a level of planning and resources that went far beyond simple real estate speculation. Vale approached her position with visible impatience, clearly uncomfortable with her extended phone conversation. His younger companion remained by the car, but kept checking his watch as if operating on a strict timeline. "Mrs. Marquez, we really do need to conclude our business here and proceed to the courthouse appointment. Time constraints require us to maintain our schedule." Elena covered her phone's microphone and fixed Vale with a stare that would have stopped a charging bull. "Mr. Vale, I'm speaking with my attorney about these documents you've presented. I assume you have no objection to legal counsel reviewing mineral rights agreements?" For the first time since his arrival, Vale's professional composure cracked completely. His face flushed red, and he exchanged a quick glance with his companion that looked remarkably like panic. Caleb's voice came through the phone with crystal clarity. "Elena, do not go to that courthouse meeting. Do not sign anything they put in front of you. I'm calling the sheriff's office right now to report document fraud, and I'll be at your place within 30 minutes. The mention of law enforcement caused Vale's companion to take several steps toward their sedan. His nervous energy now transformed into obvious alarm. Vale stepped closer to Elena, with a forced smile that failed to mask the desperation creeping into his voice. His expensive gold watch caught the morning sunlight as he gestured toward the courthouse appointment, and Elena noticed his leather shoes were completely wrong for ranch property, already stained with mud and manure from her yard. "Mrs. Marquez, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the legal situation here. Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately, without involving unnecessary complications." Elena kept Caleb on the line while studying Vale's face, which had shifted from professional confidence to barely controlled panic in the span of minutes. His younger companion had moved to the driver's side of their sedan and was speaking rapidly into his own phone, clearly reporting the developing crisis to someone with authority over their operation. "Mr. Vale, the only misunderstanding is why you brought forged documents to my property and surrounded my house with heavy machinery without permission. My attorney is very clear about what constitutes criminal fraud." Vale's practiced composure cracked further, revealing something desperate underneath. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet computer, swiping through screens with increasing urgency before turning it toward Elena. "Mrs. Marquez, you need to understand the scope of what we're discussing here. This property sits directly above one of the largest lithium deposits discovered in Texas. We're talking about mineral rights worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The development timeline cannot accommodate delays or legal challenges." The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow, suddenly explaining the pressure, the forged documents, and the aggressive tactics. Lithium mining meant complete destruction of her land, massive open pits, chemical processing facilities, and industrial operations that would obliterate every trace of the life she and David had built. Vale continued speaking faster now, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "The bulldozers you see represent just the beginning of site preparation. If we cannot reach agreement through normal channels, alternative measures become necessary. The machinery is programmed to begin clearing operations at exactly 3 o'clock this afternoon if proper documentation is not filed at the courthouse." Elena felt ice form in her stomach as the true threat became clear. These people were not simply trying to buy her property. They were prepared to destroy it regardless of her legal rights, banking on the assumption that fighting them in court would take longer than rebuilding after the damage was done. Caleb's voice came through the phone with sharp urgency. "Elena, Sheriff Martinez is on his way to your location right now. Keep them talking, and do not let them leave until law enforcement arrives." Vale apparently heard enough of the conversation to understand that his window of opportunity was closing rapidly. He nodded sharply to his companion, who immediately started the sedan's engine, while Vale backed toward the passenger door with his hands raised in a gesture of false surrender. "Mrs. Marquez, you have until 3 o'clock to reconsider your position. The development will proceed with or without your cooperation." Elena stepped directly into Vale's path, blocking his retreat to the sedan with a determination that surprised even herself. 8 months of grief and uncertainty had prepared her for this moment more than she realized, and she was not about to let these criminals escape before law enforcement arrived. "Mr. Vale, you're not leaving my property until the sheriff gets here. You just admitted to planning the destruction of private land based on forged documents. That makes this a crime scene." Vale's face flushed red with anger and desperation, his polished facade completely abandoned now. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number with trembling fingers, speaking in urgent whispers to whoever answered. "We have a problem at the Marquez site. The woman called a lawyer and the sheriff. You need to activate the contingency plan immediately." Elena strained to hear the response, catching fragments about timeline acceleration and damage control. Frank appeared beside her, carrying the shotgun he used for coyotes and wearing an expression that made it clear he was prepared to use it if necessary. The younger man emerged from the sedan with his own phone pressed to his ear, his conversation more audible than Vale's. "Sir, they discovered the Peterson equipment connection and identified the forged notary seal. Legal is saying we need to abort and activate the insurance protocols." Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. This was not a simple land grab by one development company. It was a coordinated operation involving multiple participants, backup plans, and what sounded like predetermined exit strategies for when things went wrong. Caleb's voice crackled through her phone with an urgent update. "Elena, Sheriff Martinez just radioed that he's 2 minutes out. But I've discovered something else. Peterson Heavy Equipment reported those bulldozers stolen from their Austin yard 3 days ago. Whoever is running this operation has been planning it for weeks and covering their tracks in advance. The revelation that the machines were stolen explained why they bore no work orders or contact information, while raising disturbing questions about the resources and criminal sophistication behind the scheme. Elena realized she was not facing simple corporate pressure, but organized criminal activity with connections reaching beyond her small corner of rural Texas. A distant siren began wailing across the countryside, growing louder as Sheriff Martinez approached her property. Vale and his companion exchanged panicked looks before Vale barked orders into his phone with increasing desperation. "Execute the insurance plan now. Transfer liability to the subcontractors and activate the shell company protocols. We cannot afford exposure at the corporate level." Elena watched with grim satisfaction as their careful plans unraveled in real time. But she also understood that powerful people with extensive resources rarely faced consequences unless someone fought hard enough to hold them accountable. The sheriff's arrival would stop the immediate threat, but exposing the full scope of this criminal network would require evidence, legal expertise, and the kind of courage that David had always believed she possessed. The siren grew louder, promising help, but also signaling the beginning of a much larger battle than Elena had ever imagined fighting. Sheriff Martinez's patrol car roared up Elena's driveway, gravel spraying from beneath its tires as it came to an abrupt stop between the bulldozers and the black sedan. The sheriff emerged with his hand resting on his service weapon, his weathered face taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who had dealt with corporate intimidation before. "Nobody moves until I sort this out," Martinez announced, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years in law enforcement. Vale and his companion froze beside their vehicle, their earlier confidence replaced by the pale recognition that their situation had deteriorated beyond any possibility of smooth resolution. Elena handed Martinez the forged documents, while Caleb's voice continued providing legal guidance through her phone speaker. The sheriff examined each page carefully, his expression darkening as he spotted the same inconsistencies that had alerted Elena to the fraud. "Mr. Vale, these documents show signatures allegedly notarized by Sarah Chen, who surrendered her Texas commission 6 months ago and moved to California. That makes these worthless pieces of paper and evidence of multiple felonies." Vale's companion made a sudden movement toward the sedan's open door, but Frank stepped forward with his shotgun raised, blocking any escape attempt. The younger man's face went white as he realized they were completely surrounded and facing serious criminal charges. Martinez radioed for backup and a crime scene team while continuing his investigation. He walked the perimeter of the bulldozers, photographing their positions and checking serial numbers against the stolen equipment database. Each confirmation added another charge to the growing list of crimes committed on Elena's property. "Mrs. Marquez, these machines were reported stolen from Peterson Heavy Equipment 3 days ago. We're looking at grand theft, criminal trespass, document fraud, and conspiracy charges at minimum." Elena felt a surge of vindication mixed with relief as the full weight of law enforcement began bearing down on her tormentors. Vale attempted one final desperate gambit, pulling out his phone to call what he claimed was his attorney, but Martinez confiscated the device as evidence before any calls could be completed. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars arrived along with a forensics van, transforming Elena's quiet ranch into an active crime scene. Deputies began collecting evidence while crime scene technicians documented everything from the bulldozer positions to tire tracks in Elena's driveway. Caleb arrived during the evidence collection process, carrying a thick folder of David's authentic documents and legal records. He worked closely with Martinez to establish the timeline of fraudulent activity and identify all the criminal violations that had occurred. Elena, this operation involved forged documents, stolen heavy equipment, criminal conspiracy, and attempted extortion. We're looking at federal charges because the scheme crossed state lines and involved interstate commerce. Vale and his companion were placed in handcuffs and read their rights before being loaded into separate patrol cars. As the vehicles pulled away, Elena realized that the immediate threat to her property had been completely neutralized, but more importantly, she had found the courage to fight back against forces that had seemed overwhelming just hours earlier. 3 weeks later, Elena stood on her front porch watching the last of the stolen bulldozers being loaded onto recovery trailers for return to Peterson Heavy Equipment. Sheriff Martinez had coordinated the removal process personally, ensuring that no trace of the criminal operation remained on her property. The federal investigation had uncovered a massive fraud network targeting rural landowners across 5 states. Vale and his associates now faced federal charges for racketeering, document fraud, and organized criminal conspiracy. Meridian Development Corporation had been revealed as a shell company funded by overseas investors seeking to acquire mineral rights through illegal means. Caleb arrived with the final legal documents confirming Elena's complete ownership of her property and mineral rights. The forged agreements had been officially voided, and the county recorder's office had flagged the case to prevent similar fraud attempts in the future. Elena, the FBI recovered evidence showing they targeted over 40 properties in Texas alone. Your decision to fight back probably saved dozens of other families from losing their land. Elena accepted the documents with hands that no longer trembled, feeling the weight of victory and transformation. 8 months of grief and uncertainty had been replaced by a fierce confidence in her own strength and judgment. She had discovered that the quiet widow who buried her husband possessed the courage to face down organized criminals and powerful corporate interests. Frank appeared from the direction of the cattle pasture, where he had been helping Elena repair fence damaged by the bulldozers during their removal. His presence over the past weeks had reminded her that she was not truly alone, and that the community David had loved still surrounded her with support. Elena, I've been thinking about that conversation we had with Caleb about setting up a landowner protection network. Other folks need to know how to recognize these schemes before they get this far. Elena nodded, already planning the meetings and educational sessions that would help her neighbors avoid the trauma she had endured. The experience had taught her that fighting injustice required both personal courage and community action, and she intended to ensure that other families had the knowledge and support to protect themselves. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her land, illuminating the vegetable garden she and David had planted, and the cattle pasture that would remain undisturbed by mining operations. Elena had saved more than her property. She had preserved a way of life and discovered her own capacity for leadership in the face of overwhelming adversity. That evening, Elena called her sister in California for the first time since David's funeral. The conversation lasted 2 hours, filled with laughter and plans for a visit that had been postponed by grief and uncertainty. Elena Martinez was no longer the frightened widow who had answered threatening phone calls. She was a woman who had found her strength and intended to use it. Thank you for watching another story from our Western collection. Click on the screen now to discover more tales of courage and justice from the American frontier. Please subscribe to our channel and consider leaving a super chat to support us in bringing you new stories every week.